There you go. Hey, how are you? Hi, I'm Mike. Thank you so much. It's great to meet you. Oh. Did you hear me? Yeah. Go in my car? No. Awesome. Thank you. Good to meet you. Sir, how are we doing? Good.
No, he's doing a mic check and a mic down.
Good. Thanks. If you need anything, thanks.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Microphone check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We are at the National Press Club. Mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You got it? Got the white, focal, and your audio check is good? Okay, cool. All right. Mic check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4. 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11. Mic check, mic check.
Yeah, that's what we're just going to grab it.
Handheld mic check, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. This is a mic check. This is a mic check. Mic check, 1, 2, 2, 2.
Yeah, he would still come back. Yeah, he would come back.
You'll be there on the read in the second period. And you can bring up that a guest with you. The ice seats. Then coordinate. He'll have the person come pick you up. Right before the second period. Whatever. Bring you up there. If you want to jump the time, we'll probably ask you to send a couple pictures of when you were in the Navy and a short bio of you served in a Naval Academy. You served here and there. He'll be a good contact for all your support stuff too.
Max, he's no right there.
Now they have developing banks here at hotels. They're called skywalks. So they're built, yeah. Well, in Bangkok, they're actually kind of happy because they're above the roadway. So once you get on the skywalk, it's quite pleasant. But if you're not on the skywalk, you're right next to all the traffic. You're trying to cross the street somehow. Harry. Very nice hotel. They're all affordable hotels. Not over the top.
Which would be horrible. I'm totally against that. That's what I'm afraid.
I am willing to compromise if they try to do a small value. The land is too park-like, it's too valuable, it's too in the city. Like you said, flop. Just typical ginormous NFL stadium there, as a parking, and just be like, okay, that's what we're gonna do. Like,
I think they're thinking big, but not literally big. But you know, it's got to be. I think Alan Go said necessarily have to be.
Oh, no.
Like, I don't want it to be 100,000 people come to the offer. It's probably 60. And a dome.
Yeah, like
We got the stadium. The stadium. And Academy it's got to be used for years.
they got to look over
some of them
but whatever squadron was going to do it, can't do it now. Can you help us get a flyover?
She staked her career on it. And it's politically popular. There are lots of neighbors who are into different stuff, but like if you talk to people, she knows that. She knows, especially among like long Southern border, they're sort of more popular. So that's why I have been against it for a long time. But like they have like those ones are against me. I'm not going to willing to argue in California that being E17, Texas, I think there's a couple.
but that's just the nature of
51 fighters.
Like fighter.
The
opponents are always going to be more vocal and
like Tom Cruise has a P-51.
like the NFL,
which was featured in the movie at the end. Maverick 2.
ticket sales like continue to get money. I really hope that the city and Harris would like come up with yeah, we can have a smaller stadium, but still give him like more expensive amenities he wants, all that stuff. Tickets are going to be even more expensive with a smaller stadium. That's what I want. I think if they could do something around the size of RFK, like 50,000 seats, I would call that a win. Because she could be like, I'll let Josh Harris have what he wants, give him less taxes. I really think that's what he's gonna want parking. He's gonna want seats, and hopefully
people are thinking it's going to be just a sea of parking.
that's what.
That ain't going to happen.
I hope not. I hope not.
I'll be there in the city saying,
I hope so. I think I've heard rumors of them like doing some metro station until like Oklahoma Avenue or something. Not necessarily work. Like if the water gets shut off, I'm always. I live at 14. It's a great location to get down here because, especially with the express bus, the 59, I can get down here in like 20 minutes. Unfortunately, Metro is phasing out the express bus for 14th Street, which is awesome. They're like, they're doing the bus revamp, and Randy's like, we're adding bus service on 14th Street, so you might not get an express bus, you can have more buses. Like, it's amazing. Even going with traffic in the morning, you still get down here in 95 minutes. I'm usually coming cross traffic. It's amazing. I can get down here so fast. I can get to Cotty Bottom in like 30 minutes, 35 minutes door to door. If I take Metro and I walk, it usually takes 30 minutes. But I'm always down here on Friday nights.
Yeah, we're in Upper Marlboro. Right where Super Parkway.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Right, yeah, I've seen that, yeah.
So we were on Connect Avenue in Juvenile. Actually, it's not as bad as you would think. They added an entire building and just,
Juvenile. Oh, I didn't know he was. I knew he was president. I didn't know he was.
So they look, they wanted to go to Silver Spring, but Montgomery County was not all this kind of stuff, print shortages, like, we'll give you everything. It only takes me 20 days to get out there. There's not much out there right now, but it's relatively easy to get in now.
You know, my friend works for like UFCW, so I think they actually own that whole building at like State.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like with what you guys do, I've always seen lease, you know, for lease, and I think that probably selling that building and
Oh, wait, that's right.
We're cutting everything, so people are working from home, work from home probably a thing forward. Let's just get like a couple floors and like Antique service. And everybody, really no one would like that except for you. Really? Yeah, like in our own.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Phil.
You're also getting worse every time to the office.
I've heard. Are you the only like capital or Washington
Came with the chair.
No, there's a few of those that in DC are lobbyists in the Northeast right in Costco. We have a legislative office in Washington Capitol, 400 block of New Jersey. So
Where were you, or are you?
so I worked there a bit during the pandemic. That's what it is.
What are your priorities for this year?
Interviewing or
Right now the parties are
claiming to do things I actually didn't.
and we have some federal workers. We have an affiliate National Federation of Federal Employees.
Amazing time to be retired. Yeah, I'm sure I'm happy about that. Working.
They're at the VA, tax force
Trust companies.
so they're all obviously
Whitley Park.
but also federal contractors.
Well, it's parking interesting. Yeah, they say occupancy, and they say, yeah, but the question is how much are they charging? Metro elevator, which is
Probably the same thing that can be in that
I've actually done
airline, railroad side. We already did that with FLRA.
well, it's interesting to see something like that.
And the tariffs take worse than tariffs. Bad actors. My favorite don't follow. Against the whole world. Canada does follow.
That's where
What about fentanyl?
5 hours left in the
I like your research.
You guys got members in Canada. You got members in Mexico.
We do.
Well, I haven't seen the story, even that's what I heard about how Bell is well, basically any American who can't
That's exactly what we're saying. Yeah, if you want to talk to our Canadian general resident, Dave Sharp, we've done a bunch of joint statements.
Barry left because he and his buddies died.
Talking about a lot of that for the special defense, which was so uniform. Parts are made here, parts are made there, they're going across the hill. It's a fair relation. In a lot of cases, they're paying money they're U.S. companies. Like, they're not
this story done, but yeah, I've been talking around with people and I heard about that. Like global, vertical, I've done a few stories for. I was disappointed because I was trying to put these stories around the city crash. I couldn't find any papers. Vertical didn't want any sort of something that we had after but I think that was only a temporary thing. Like, stay out of government, stay out of government, get out of trade. Like, there's tons of news there because people after their businesses.
So,
national pride again. Then they beat us in hockey last night.
I'm just visiting. I'll take your card.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the National Press Club. Our formal program will begin in just about 2 minutes, but before we get started, I wanted to quickly review some housekeeping items. This event is being streamed live, so now would be an excellent time to silence your cell phones. You'll also find cards on your seats for questions. If you have questions for our speaker today, please write them on the cards and pass them to the staff members collecting them around the room. I will ask as many questions as time permits, but I can't ask what I can't read, so please make sure you print legibly. Thanks again. We'll get started in just about a minute.
Thank you. Hello.
Row intro.
Good morning. Welcome to our Headliners Newsmaker at the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Mike Balsamo, the 118th president of the National Press Club and the U.S. law enforcement editor for the Associated Press. We're delighted to have with us today the mayor of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, Muriel Bowser. Last week, Mayor Bowser grabbed headlines with her ambitious plan to redevelop the RFK Stadium site and entice the Washington Commanders football team to return to the city limits. The plan envisions an entertainment district, sports complex, shopping, housing, and a revitalized waterfront. Imagine the Super Bowl, Beyonce, even Taylor Swift, she said. World-class cities like ours, Mayor Bowser told the crowd, we do big things. Yet, President Trump, sitting just blocks away from Mayor Bowser's office, has said some not-so-nice things about the city in which she's led for the past decade. He's called it out for filth and decay, and during the campaign vowed to take over Washington, D.C. While that would require Congress to repeal what's known as the Home Rule Law in existence since 1973, two members of Congress, Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah and Republican Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee, have introduced such a bill called Bringing Oversight to Washington and Safety to Every Resident, which, not so coincidentally, spells out Bowser. And earlier this week, the Washington Post reported that President Trump would issue an executive order to crack down on crime and homeless encampments in the city, perhaps his first salvo into a takeover attempt. Clearly, the city is in for a wild ride, but this is not Mayor Bowser's first rodeo. She's been held elected office since 2004, first as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, and then as a member of the DC Council. She was elected mayor in 2015, and is only the second person to be elected 3 times as DC mayor. During her tenure, she's led the city through the COVID-19 pandemic, racial justice protests, and the events of January 6th. But she says her best job is just being a mom to her daughter, Miranda. Please join me in welcoming, giving a warm National Press Club welcome to Washington, D.C.'s Mayor, Muriel Bowser.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I've been in this building a million times. I've not been in this room.
In this room? Welcome to the...
No, I take that back. I think I gave my first press conference after winning the primary in 2014, maybe in this room.
In this room. Wow,
Yes, I
that's
have.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I did.
Fun memories. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about home rule. So DC has had home rule since 1973 and fought hard to win it. As I mentioned in the introduction, President Trump mentioned many times, including this week, that he wants to take over Washington, D.C. Can you talk a little bit about, why home rule is important to D.C. and what's the case for keeping home rule?
Well, the case that we actually make is for D.C. becoming the 51st state. I know there's been a lot of talk about someplace else becoming the 51st state, but we are going to be the 51st state because what it means is the discussion you've had about whether a president or a couple of members of Congress can take over our limited self-determination is because we don't enjoy the same rights as American citizens. But we are the same as American citizens. We pay taxes more than most, more per capita than any place in America. We're larger than 2 states. We're literally down the street from the Congress, but we have no representation. So the case that DC residents, not to tell you that your question wasn't the right question, but the question for us is how do we maintain the pathway to the 51st state, and why not? We're Americans, we pay taxes, we go to war, we have all of the responsibilities of citizenship, but we don't have all of the rights. And the unfortunate answer is it has come down to partisanship. And we don't regard DC being added as the 51st state as a partisan issue, but it is an issue of how to make our democracy more perfect. So in talking about home rule, what it means basically is that we elect local officials, we pass our laws, we have our own budget, that's sometimes a misconception out there in the world. We take care of ourselves, and we do so, as I said, and we give more to the federal government than we get back. And so making sure that we adhere to the principles that so many people believe in, the government should be closest to the people. That's why home rule is important to us.
So President Trump's expected to sign an executive order that would give the federal government more power in D.C. Do you think the federal government has the right to do this? Do you see this as President Trump's first move in an ultimate endgame to, as he says, take over D.C.? And how does D.C. protect itself from federal encroachment?
I think there's been a lot of speculation about that, and mostly among your colleagues here, but I don't know that that's the case. Certainly, the president has executive powers, and we've seen that he has issued a lot of executive orders. Some of them have been disputed. Some of them are being argued right now. But I think what the approach that we have taken with the White House is to identify those things that we share. What are our shared priorities? The president is very focused on making our nation's capital the most beautiful capital in the world. And it turns out that's our focus too. And in Washington, D.C., unlike some places, the federal government actually has a role in doing that, an oversized role in doing that. So there's some things like national parks that, when your city as small as ours, how the national parks operate is a very big deal. There's been the issue of the return of federal employees to in-person work. Now, we didn't argue for in-person work going with mass firings, which is going to have an impact certainly on Americans in all 50 states in Washington, D.C. And the federal government does have a role in public safety in the district, unlike most places, because they're a big part of our criminal justice system, including judges and including prosecutors. So there are things that we can work on together.
The Washington Post has reported that this executive order would be focused on crime and quality of life issues like graffiti and homeless encampments. After you met with then President-elect Trump at Mar-a-Lago, you expressed a willingness to work with the president on issues of mutual concern, including beautifying the city. Are these the issues that you discussed? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Once again, I can't speak to an executive order that I'm not sure exists or will be issued, so I'll say that. But I will say yeah, we talked about beautification issues and we talked about public safety. But let me say this about public safety. What I was able to report to the president was that I believed, had the picture in his mind of COVID era Washington D.C. because that's the Washington D.C. he left. And we did have some impacts of COVID closures on both public safety and homelessness. And so I wanted to make clear that the Washington that he has returned to is coming back from COVID era impacts. So I developed a comeback plan, which is our 5-year economic development strategy that has a lot of investments in the downtown, for example, how we bring more residents, how we bring more activity and vitality to the downtown, and the federal workforce is a big part of that. I've always believed that President Trump viewed Washington from the eyes of a developer, and that was kind of how we approached him in his first term. It turns out that he didn't get that involved in real estate, but I think they're more interested in that in this turn. So we are looking for ways that investments can be made in our national parks and in underutilized federal buildings with the government as well.
I want to ask you a little bit about the federal workforce in just a second here, but as you know, we take questions from the audience. So, national field producer for Fox News, James Levinson, sent in the following question. In the president's comments on taking over D.C. government, he cited issues with crime and corruption as his argument of why he needs to step in. Just yesterday, there was a bribery indictment of a former deputy director of ONSE. The D.C. Council also expelled Trayon White on bribery accusations weeks ago. Are you worried that there's an underlying corruption problem in certain parts of the D.C. government?
I'm not, and this is why I say that. Our system worked the way it was supposed to in both of the cases that you mentioned. We have, and actually I authored when I was a member of the council, a pretty comprehensive and wide-ranging ethics reform law that allows the council to expel a member for the type of conduct that the indictment indicates. That hadn't been the case 10 years before that. We would have had a official linger until the criminal justice process had run its course. So we have very, very high standards for conduct. I am proud to lead a incredible workforce. This workforce has stood up for DC during COVID, during snowstorms. In January, we had 3 national special security events, 2 snowstorms. We had an inaugural ceremony that changed, I think, the Thursday before the Monday of the inauguration. And so all of these activities were supported by public servants. Our public servants, especially our police department, has also led to a historic decrease in crime that we experienced in 2024. The previous year had been a tough year for us, admittedly, and we worked very hard to change what I thought, in some cases, were COVID-era policies that went into effect that affected the very fragile balance of a public safety ecosystem in Washington. We worked with the council to really reset the laws. And in my view, we had to get a better focus on accountability for violent crime. And we've been able to do that. And we're seeing the impacts of that. So, but those are all our police officers that go to work every single day. Our teachers have been incredible. We just got our kind of the national report card scores, and we see DC public schools outpacing urban school districts around the country. And those are our teachers who are going in classrooms and really moving kids in reading and math. So we're proud of the work of our workforce. But having said that, people know that they have to follow the rules, and if they don't, then there are very real consequences.
Since the pandemic and work from home options, the downtown area has been a bit of a ghost town. President Trump has now ordered the federal workforce back to their offices, as you mentioned. And at the same time, Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency are eviscerating the federal workforce. What do you see as the impact of these two dueling orders? And what has President Trump told you about his federal workforce plans? And then to follow up on that, do you have any plans for a sort of revitalization of downtown DC?
Yes. So the president and I are, I think, simpatico on the return to the office. And the discussion that I have been having around the region, not just DC, is that we need to make the case for why these federal jobs and federal activity are best supported. The infrastructure here best supports that work, and that's what we do. When we talk about the federal government, let me be clear. Not all federal workers are in Washington, D.C. They're all over the country. I think you've heard some of the stories even about national parks workers and CDC workers. And so these are federal workers all across the country. I think we have in this region close to 400,000 federal workers. Is that right? We have one? No, close to 600,000 federal workers. And about a third of those, or a little bit more than a third, are located in Washington, D.C. About 70,000 of them are D.C. residents of our 703,000 people. So it's a huge impact to have people's jobs affected. And so our really focus is on making sure we're being supportive of our residents and calling on the government to not use a chainsaw, but figure out which jobs we need and which jobs we don't. And that can be done in a orderly way and in a humane way.
Let me just follow up on that question quickly with another question from the audience here. Associated Press reporter Ashraf Khalil sends in the following question. What do you expect the economic impact to be on the D.C. region for the, as you mentioned, thousands of federal workers who are losing their jobs right now in terms of things like unemployment rates, the job market, the healthcare marketplace? And when do you think that wave will hit the system, and are you prepared for it?
Well, it's beginning to hit the system, and I expect probably next week to start talking to our community in a comprehensive way about what we see the impacts as. So far, I think what we've seen hit our unemployment system is expected when there is a change of administration, especially when it's a different party. So that's what we're seeing right now. But we know that over the next months, more and more people will be impacted. Now, the thing that we'll need the White House and the President's cabinet is to work with all of us about how unemployment, with the separations that they're making, will work for government workers.
I want to pivot. I want to ask a little bit about crime in D.C. The D.C. Police Union has said that the force is staffed at dangerously low levels, the lowest number, they say, in 50 years. When 3 police officers were shot last month, they pointed to this as a risk to an overburdened police force. What efforts are you taking to recruit more officers in Washington, D.C., and how do you ensure that violent crime doesn't rise if the police ranks continue to shrink?
Well, we put enough officers on the street, but unfortunately, we do it in a less ideal way. That's why, if you're a budget wonk like I am, we have higher overtime numbers than is efficient. But we have to do that to make sure we have the shifts and the people on the street that we need. So we are, and as long as I've been mayor, have funded our department at a level that allows us to hire the maximum number of people at a given time. I won't go into the kind of sordid history in the couple of years that we weren't able to hire, but with attrition and with a couple of years of disruption, you can see your numbers go down. Our plan is to get back to 4,000 officers. I believe our police chief believes that we need to be between 3,800 and 4,000 officers. Now, keep in mind that we're not just a city, we're a city, county, state, and we support the federal government in large-scale events. So our force per capita may be bigger than some cities of our size, but that's what we need.
National Press Club member and writer for Bloomberg City Lab, Linda Poon, sends in this question. The top criminal prosecutor in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office just stepped down after refusing to follow a directive from the interim U.S. Attorney, Ed Martin. Are you concerned that these conflicts could affect the U.S. Attorney's Office's ability to prosecute crimes that are committed in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think that this is what, and this is a conversation I had with the president about, again, a U.S. attorney is not elected, not appointed by the mayor, not accountable to local officials or taxpayers. So that is a position that either comes from the president or the attorney general, that appointment. So it is very important to us that the U.S. attorney focuses on violent criminals, on people who use guns, and on repeat offenders, and take hard cases to trial. And sometimes we see out of prosecutors, if it's not a slam dunk, they don't want to proceed. But we need to send a strong message that if you use a gun in the district, that you're going to jail. And that we need to have prosecutors who share that sentiment.
I want to just ask one more question about crime. So obviously violent crime in the District of Columbia has been down over the last few years, but homicide numbers, particularly this month in comparison, are slightly up. Are you concerned about that sort of rise in homicides in that same sort of vein as you're talking about prosecutions of violent crime?
Well, anybody who analyzes crime doesn't use like a month as an indicator of a trend. And so we are concerned about any crime in any month and drive it down, but I don't know that I would suggest that was indicative of our efforts. What we saw last year was remarkable because of the really strategic work that our Chief of Police, Pamela Smith, has done. And one of the tools that she has used is a real-time crime center that we put in place down at police headquarters, and a partnership with the community to get more cameras feeding into this crime center so that we can both use it as a predictive tool, but also use it to make quick arrests and support better prosecutions. And so all of that together is helping. We have another idea that we're gonna pitch to the president because we believe that camera system works to help us fight crime, especially when we're rebuilding the numbers of people we have as crime fighters. And we think that will be a very important project for downtown Washington.
I want to ask a little bit about the RFK Stadium site. So you said last week you want the Washington Commanders to make the RFK Stadium site their new home. Why do you think that's the best use of that site, and what are you willing to do to entice them to relocate there? Are you talking about, tax breaks? Can you just expand on what you're thinking there?
Sure. Well, it was longer than last week that I've said it. I've said it since I've said it for a long time, since before I was mayor, I'm sure. And for people who are not familiar with this site, it is 177 acres. It's on the banks of the Anacostia River. It is the former home of the Washington football team. It currently has the former stadium, RFK, that we haven't used, I think, in almost 10 years. So it is literally dilapidated and falling down. We've begun the demolition. But the rest of the site is asphalt parking lots. And so the district has had a lease with the federal government for RFK. I think that we got in 1988. The lease was going to expire, I think, 2038. So for us, for the city to really make an investment in that property, we had to have control of it for longer than the next 14 years. So we've been working to get control of it from the National Park Service so that we could make the investments in it. And we finally did that. And it happened at the end of December. So now we control it for the next 99 years. And we are either going to have a great development with an NFL stadium or we're going to have a great development without an NFL stadium. Why we want the NFL to go there is because this is our team. And then, as you've heard, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, I believe that great cities have their sports teams, they have great entertainment, great arts and culture, wonderful restaurants, #1 park system like us. And so all of those things we think can happen in our city. And it kind of gets a chuckle, but it's true that when the World Cup comes to the United States, we can't have the games in the nation's capital because we don't have a venue. And we could have NCAA, the Super Bowl, of course, and lots of entertainment events that bring revenue to the city. For us, hospitality and sports and entertainment are not just fun and games. They employ a lot of DC residents with good salaries and contribute to our bottom line.
So we saw with Navy Yard and the wharf that redevelopment there led to increases in rent and housing prices. What will you do at the RFK Stadium site to keep that from happening while still creating what you've described as world-class development?
Well, what we've actually seen is when we build more housing, we have seen a less steep increase, like half the national average over the last 10 years in rent increases. And that is directly related to the amount of supply we put in the market for housing. We've created 36,000 new units, and we did it ahead of schedule. And because we've increased the supply, our rents have been blunted, and rent increases have been blunted, almost half than the national average. But we see the kind of housing crisis as a big one for our nation that we have to confront. I'm leading a task force right now with the National League of Cities to talk about how cities can work with the federal government on these housing issues. But even from when I started, what it takes to build affordable housing, the cost of labor, the cost of materials, inflation have just exploded. And for cities to continue to be partners with the private sector, we're going to have to be innovative and have great federal partnerships.
I want to ask this question from National Press Club member and freelance journalist Pat Host. What is the maximum seating capacity that you're willing to support at a new stadium at RFK?
I think what we've seen, and I think there's some flexibility there. Certainly we want to have something that's going to be, that works for the team and that works for our economics. And I think that the new stadiums are in the range of 60 to 70,000.
I want to pivot a little bit to housing here for a second and follow up on something that you said. So you recently introduced the Rental Act of 2025 aimed at supporting existing affordable housing, creating more affordable housing and making it easier to evict people charged with violent crimes. Affordable housing has been a focus of your administration since you've taken office. Why did you take this up as a core issue for this city? And can you assess for us where things stand in terms of reaching your goals for housing in the district and what else still needs to happen?
Sure. So we introduced the Rental Act, and I would kind of break it into two buckets. The first bucket is kind of rebalancing what I call our policy environment, similar to what I said about public safety. COVID caused a lot of changes to the law, changes that were meant to help during the period of time where people couldn't work or people were sick or businesses were closed. And some of those policies and operations have had a tail. And so we have to change the policies. We have to address the kind of operational issues that are keeping people and landlords and tenants from having the relationship that they had before COVID. And focusing on the fact that we won't have safe, affordable, and well-kept affordable housing if people aren't paying their rent. So we're addressing in one half of the bill, like the 30% of people who we think are using the system to not pay their rent. And it's having an effect on the 70% of the people who are doing exactly what they should and what they're contractually obligated to do. So that's part of it. The second part of it is how do we get back to the type of production that made us #1 in the region, in the area of and the jurisdiction in the country that has invested the most in affordable housing. So we have to get back to that level of production that got us to 36,000 units. And part of that is looking at our laws, and one of them is around, we have a law that focuses on allowing renters to be able to buy their units, affordable units. So where we've made some tweaks to the TOPA law that ensures that TOPA is focused on affordable housing, not all housing, and that like financial transactions aren't kind of swept up in the law. And so these are some things. This TOPA law hasn't been modernized since it was created, and we think it's necessary to do now so that we can be #1 again. Now, when I was elected 10 years ago, our biggest issue in this city was how do we stay affordable for more people? Because we do have a hot economy. People do want to live here. People are starting their businesses here. And the thing that I always remind people of, like even in this space of time when the Census Bureau put out their most recent report, which was the fastest growing state in America? Washington, D.C. So people vote with their feet. So they're moving here, so we have more people who lived here than before the pandemic. Our schools came back faster. And so it is important that we continue to have this be a city that people choose to live, and affordability, housing affordability is like the #1 thing on their list.
I want to ask you a little bit more about your partnership with the National League of Cities that you announced, a new advisory group, as you mentioned, America's Housing Comeback. Can you talk a little bit more about the aim of that group and then what prompted its formation?
Well, part of it is, and I've done a task force with the League of Cities before, and the League of Cities is a bipartisan group, and it's made up of executive officials like me, but also members of legislators, appointed officials, and from cities and towns of all sizes. And so what I find really interesting is that no matter where you're from in America, there's some kind of housing issue in your town. And so having the league that has the staff and the resources to make our case to federal lawmakers is hugely important. So we can share, and we are using what we learned in our kind of 10-year investment to create 36,000 units to share. But we also want to learn from our counterparts across the nation about other ways that we can do affordable housing with, more, in a way that we're not spending as much per unit. So we have to work on that. We're learning from my co-chair. One of the co-chairs, for example, is from a university town. And what are we doing for university housing? We have a lot of great institutions here, and they need to remain competitive. And part of being competitive is how they do housing in a market like ours. So we're looking to work on that, and actually invite more universities to have their East Coast outposts be in Washington, D.C. And so we see that Johns Hopkins recently opened, USC has made a big investment in D.C. In addition to our great universities.
While family homelessness has decreased in the District of Columbia, the point-in-time count showed homelessness in D.C. rose 14% between 2023 and 2024. What specific efforts are you taking to combat that rise in homelessness, and is President Trump right that federal resources are needed to combat that rise?
Federal resources can always help, I think in point in time, it does fluctuate. We've seen, and I have had in my tenure, a huge focus on ending family homelessness. And we're very proud that a promise I made to close a notorious family homeless shelter that was in an old hospital would close, and we would open humane family shelter across the city, and we did. We opened 8 shelters that housed no more than 50 families, and we were able to decentralize the services for that families that allowed them to get into permanent housing. So we know that that system works. If we put people, while they're experiencing an emergency, in a smaller, better resourced, more humane environment, they can get it together and move on to permanent housing. So we've done that on the family side. We think we need a similar approach on the single side. Now, what can the federal government do? First of all, a lot of people that you see on the street we have shelter. Unlike a lot of cities, we have shelter. So anybody that's on the street and has a shelter bed if they want it. And so we have invested in that system, and we want to continue to invest in that system to get off the street. Here's where the president, we don't think is right, is that the number of people on the street is not vast. It just isn't. Anytime you see in a city of our size, if there's a park or there's a place where a number of tents are, it is jolting, and it's a jolting to us, and we want people to get off the street. In the same period of time that you mentioned, we cut the number of encampments and the number of tents in the city by half. And so we know the types of processes that can work to do that. What doesn't usually work is kind of a mass just displacement of people, because guess what? They just go someplace else down the street. So part of what we do is try to work with people to get them in a place where they'll move to shelter or they'll move inside to housing. Otherwise, it's like a whack-a-mole. If we'll close it down here, and then we'll have the same issue down the street. So yes, we have to work with it urgently, but we also have to be smart so we're not just displacing or moving around a problem. Here's another place that the federal government can help with federal housing vouchers, especially for veterans. And we've had a program like this before. And with federal housing vouchers for veterans that come with services, we can almost get any veteran into housing. And I think that's in line with the administration's goals.
I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask this question from a National Press Club member and National Journal editor, Kirk Bato. Are you concerned with sponsors or acts pulling out of World Pride, given the administration's position toward the LGBTQ community? And do you have any concerns about the Trump administration impacting World Pride?
I am concerned about it because we have seen a sponsor pull out, and keep in mind that this is a global event. It happens in places around the world, and I think it would be helpful to have a statement of support for World Pride in the District of Columbia. And keep in mind, like I said, we're a world-class city. We have beautiful hotels and venues. Many of them, I'm sure, have probably already been booked. And if I can't believe that the president would want to send the message to people not to come to the nation's capital.
Let me ask a little bit about Cedar Hill Hospital. So can you give us a status update on Cedar Hill, and what's the timeline?
Cedar Hill is a hospital that I committed to create 10 years ago to make sure we had a world-class hospital that was on the east side of the city. For people who are not as familiar with DC, part of our city is divided by a river, the other part by Rock Creek Park. So you can kind of think of DC in 3 parts. Well, the part east of the Anacostia River did not have a fully functioning hospital with the quality of care that we expected, and we believed that we had to create a new hospital to get that done. So we have a great partnership with GW Health and their physicians who are going to work there. We've built the hospital over the course of the last several years, and we expect to open April 15th.
Can you talk a little bit about, another topic that's been in the news lately? The president has obviously taken over part of the Kennedy Center and Kennedy Center's board. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you have any concerns about what's happening there, the events that are already happening there, the move on the board, and the resignations that have happened?
Well, let me just first say that David Rubenstein is an American treasure, and he chaired the board. And he has contributed a lot of his personal wealth to what he calls patriotic philanthropy. Everything from support with the Washington Monument when it was damaged, to important archival pieces at the National Archives. Even I think he even supported bringing our pandas back to the National Zoo. So he didn't operate in that role as chairman in some kind of what shall I say, honorific capacity. Like, he worked and he's smart. Like, he built a great company. And so I think we've just been honored to have his leadership. And similarly, Deborah Rutter has been a great leader of the Kennedy Center for 11 years. Now, it turns out that both of them had already announced that they would be moving on, but in a way that allowed for a smooth transition. So I don't know the current leadership. I was on the board call where Mr. Grinnell was appointed. So I will look forward to meeting him, and I hope the organization, like, they book out a couple of years in advance. So canceling shows is bad for the arts community. It's bad for our reputation in the arts community, in locally and around the world. But it's also bad for business. And like I said, people come to it's a local institution, but it's America's Arts Center, so people come from around the country to see shows. And so I don't know how we benefit at all from canceling shows and affecting economic development. So when you say you want to have a beautiful capital like we do, you can't also undercut the ways that we have a beautiful capital. And so we have to support the arts. So people probably don't realize this about DC, but we have the second highest number of theater seats in America, only second to New York. So we have a very active art scene here where we have wonderful productions and wonderful productions that are for everyone.
I want to ask a couple more local questions here. So one from the audience: the housing voucher system is deeply troubled. Support for new tenants is severely lacking, and landlords are taking financial advantage of this program. What is being done, or what will you do about it?
Well, I don't know if I would agree with everything that was said in that question, but I will say this, is that we have created intermediate step. We had our council funded a couple years ago just a big number of vouchers, and our charge was to get them out and get them out quickly. And we worked on a program that we believe would work. But I think what we need is what we discovered, that is we can't take a person who was living on the street and just put them in a unit even with support. People are struggling. So we bought recently, and this is our strategy, to look across the city, but especially in places where we know we can get people to come inside. That is almost like dormitory housing, but it's shelter housing, but it is that step between being homeless and unhoused and maybe on the street and going into permanent housing. And so we believe that that's the strategy to work, a bridge housing, if you will. And that's how we want to use our vouchers.
Let me ask another local question here. This one comes to us from National Press Club member and freelance journalist Pat Host. Ronnie Clark was killed on Christmas Eve in Northeast D.C. when a driver hit him and fled the scene on foot, leaving Clark trapped under the car. 2 months later, there have been no arrests by MPD. Clark died at the scene. Why hasn't there been more of an effort by your office in particular or MPD to get community help to bring this killer to justice?
I will, let me look into that. I'll take that as a note to look into. Certainly, our police are very aggressive about investigating traffic incidents just as much as any other violent crime. So I'll need to be updated on that.
Sure. And before I ask our final question here, let me take a moment to thank the Headliners team leader, Jen Judson, Headliners team member and past National Press Club president, Donna Lanwan-Leger, and club executive director, Didier Saji. And finally, thank you to our audience. I hope you'll join us on Friday, March 28th for Career Day at the National Press Club. If you're looking for your next journalism or communications job, you'll have the opportunity to meet recruiters, get training, and update your headshot and more. It's also my honor to present our guest with the coveted National Press Club mug.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope you use it all the time. We'll close with a final question here. Two, actually, final questions here, if you don't mind.
You ask really fast.
Yeah. You know, we've been knocking through them here. We've got a lot of questions in. I'm very experienced at this. Will D.C. take the Trump administration to court over executive actions or anything else? And how much do you expect the GOP Congress to be involved in blocking bills through the D.C. Council?
Well, I think if you look, I'll take the second one first. If you look back at kind of the history of congressional interference, it's almost predictable the type of issues that the Congress has interfered in. They usually are social issues that members want to make points on back at home. So we had a ban on, we continue to have a ban on locally supported abortion. We've had a ban on cannabis regulation, which is really dangerous, actually. And we've had other interference on mostly social issues. The most recent issue being on public safety, and you know, that's a longer story. But now there are a lot of bills kind of moving in the Congress that we're focused on. And usually we can kind of beat back issues, and we work diligently on it. I'm very grateful for the partnership I have with Representative Comer out of Kentucky, who is our oversight chair. So we work across the aisle. We always have. We work behind the scenes. We work in front of cameras, but we're always working for the benefit of the district. But this goes back to the first question you asked. We're always going to experience that until we become the 51st state. It's just that simple. So we work on that. The first part of your question is that will we sue? And the bottom line is that we have an attorney general in the district, and an elected attorney general that is not in my chain of command. And we are always talking about making sure that the laws are applied as it affects the District of Columbia. So that's what I'll say about that.
Mayor, thank you. Thank you for taking the time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you so much, Mayor. What she said about the cannabis. Watch out.
sent. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1.
Hey, Ashwin, good to see you. Good, good, good. So everybody ready? Guys, are we ready? The camera is ready? Okay. You're good? You're looking confused. We're gonna start.
Oh, you could have tapped that off, Sean. I cut that off for you. You just had to pull. It's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Yes.
Mayor, this is James with Fox News. I wanted to ask, the other day, President Trump signed an executive order on migration saying that there will be no more federal benefits for them, and in a way also targeting sanctuary cities in regards to policies that might benefit illegal migrants. Is D.C. going to remain a sanctuary city?
Well, D.C., that term isn't really represented in our law. I think there may have been a piece of legislation that the council passed related to our values, but this is not something that changes any aspect of our, how we operate.
Yeah, Muriel with DC News Now. I know you spoke inside a little bit about just the federal unemployment and what we're seeing. I just wondered if you could kind of give an overview of how unemployment works in DC. Given we have so many federal employees, how do they file and how does that impact residents that don't work for the federal government and might need to apply?
Sure. I asked Unique Morris Hughes, who is a director of our DOES, Department of Employment Services, which in other places is known as the Secretary of Labor. So I asked Dr. Morris Hughes to come and just provide that short overview.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Bowser. So filing for unemployment insurance benefits for DC residents or DC workers is the exact same as filing for benefits if you are a recently separated federal worker. I encourage people to visit fedsupport.dc.gov. It's a new site that we have up that explains eligibility criteria and what the process is. But essentially, you file an application. It's online, or you can come into any of our American Job Centers and do it in person. And you will be asked a series of questions. You'll be asked to upload documentation. And then a claims examiner will review the claim and then make a determination on the eligibility of your claim and whether it's approved or not.
And so where does that money come from for these federal workers? Is that DC tax dollars, federal tax dollars? Who pays for that?
So the Unemployment Compensation Program is an employer-funded program. And so federal workers who are recently separated, those funds come from the federal government.
And is that like a reimbursement through your office?
It is. It's like a reimbursement. And so we will seek reimbursement once an individual's been approved. And then the process is we receive funding, and that's how those benefits are covered and paid for. Yes.
Director, could I just follow up on a few kind of specifics? So could you break down for us, if you're a federal worker who took the deferred, I don't want to use the word buyout, but I just did. If you took that, are you qualified for unemployment? If you were laid off but got a severance package, how does that impact your eligibility for unemployment insurance?
So what we understand is that there's been a few different classes of separations here. One, like you've said, that's a deferred resignation, or at least is being described or called a deferred resignation program. The other, separation during probationary period. Eligibility at a very high level is dependent upon several factors. One of these factors has to do with when you are no longer receiving wages. And so for the first question, and I'm going to answer this question generally because there's a lot of nuance and we're still waiting on guidance from the Department of Labor, but generally you're not eligible to receive payments and unemployment insurance payments until you stop receiving wages. So if you are being paid for the next 8 months or you have severance for 8 months, it's reasonable to assume that you may not be eligible right away for unemployment insurance benefits. Like I said, we're going to have to receive some additional guidance from the Department of Labor on how to treat these two separate classes of separations. But generally, unemployment insurance benefits are available after a person is no longer receiving wages and separated completely from employment.
What if they left voluntarily? If they voluntarily accepted the deferred separation, would they qualify once their salary stopped
So this is a place where we're going to need the federal government to help us provide some guidance so we can make better sense of how this should be treated. I can only answer at a 50,000-foot level based on a typical scenario. And so unemployment insurance benefits could be received by an individual who is separated from employment, but we need to understand the context and the circumstances around that separation.
And are the probationary workers who are being separated, is that a different?
I would consider that a different class of separations, and again, another area where we will need some additional guidance on how to treat those individuals. But again, one of the eligibility criteria is if you are separated due to no fault of your own, you are eligible to receive benefits. Now, we have received information that there is different language that's being given to recently separated federal employees on the type or the conditions of their separation. And so there's some nuance here, and we will have to look at cases on a case-by-case basis, and then we're going to have to receive some additional guidance from the feds.
And my last, and I appreciate it, I know the balance is robust right now that you have on hand to handle these claims. Is there a tipping point? We harken back to COVID when some states actually ran out of money. Is there a number of federal employees or unemployment claims that would cause you concern for the district's ability to keep the fund solvent without having to borrow money?
So I don't know if I would say robust. I mean, the district did have an unemployment insurance trust fund that was COVID impacted and COVID depleted. And so there is a number. We're currently at about $375 million in the trust fund right now. I do want to make an important distinction, which is that unemployment insurance benefits is an employer paid tax. And so when we talk about federal workers, we are receiving funding dollar for dollar from the feds to cover those benefits. That doesn't necessarily touch the trust fund. The trust fund is used typically for private sector and other entities as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Hey, Mayor, I know you got asked a lot of questions about Trump and D.C., and one of his criticisms was crime. I wanted to get your reaction to a couple incidents yesterday, this beating by girls at Union Station that sounded frighteningly similar to what happened with Reggie Brown, at least part of the description, and then the Canada Goose Jacket robbery, and there's a video on social media supposedly of the teen saying he would do it again.
I'm not going to respond to videos. But what's your question?
Well, I mean, what more can the district do, A, to fight juvenile crime, to reduce it, but B, to get teens the message? You can't just do things again.
Well, they have to be held accountable. And our system for juveniles is a rehabilitation system, but they have to be in it to get rehabilitated. So we can't treat juvenile crime as some kind of joyride or kids being kids. Kids have to be dealt with who are committing crimes. And so our police are making good arrests, and we're going to work with the Attorney General's office to make sure that the law is being applied to these kids.
As far as, I mean, what more can be done? I know you made changes to the law, you know, with Secure DC and all. What more can be done to really get the message to these kids?
They have to be held accountable. That hasn't changed. We need more kids who we have a good arrest, we make a good case. They have to be charged and put in the system. And I've said repeatedly, that doesn't mean a diversion. That doesn't mean an unaccountable supervision program. That means we need them in the system. And then you can ask me how we're helping them. And some of the kids that we get in our system, we can get them on a good track. But we need to have them. And we continue to think of ways, even for children who haven't committed any crimes, but they're on their way. And, you know, every parent, every school can identify some kids that if we don't get them on the right track, then the MPD is going to be dealing with them. And it's how do we get families and kids mandatory services, like they have to say yes. And so there are a few tracks that we want to lean into to get kids that type of support. Okay, yep.
Thank you. This is Faisal Ali from the Pakistan Daily. My question is regarding the Kennedy Center cancellation of events. So as you mentioned before in your address, you can use some of your district attorney to process some legal things. So, do you have any authority with the federal government to challenge the measures what they are taking specifically? Because a lot of people who book the tickets and they are expected to attend the events, but they cancel that. So, can you follow some legal things with the federal government?
Well, it's hard for me to answer that question, but the Kennedy Center is created by the Congress, like the board, I believe, and I think that they give the power of the appointments to the president. So if that's your question, we'll certainly look into it, but there's nothing that we believe at this point has been outside of the law as it relates to the governance.
Thanks, Mayor. You mentioned in the chat just over in there that you had a pitch you were going to make to the president about cameras downtown. Yeah. Can you just explain in as much detail as possible what that proposal is going to be?
Well, since I came up with it yesterday, I can explain it. Well, I can a little bit because we've looked at it before. But we believe, especially, and as I've already said, that cameras, while nothing can replace having a police officer, they enhance our force levels. And so we know that, as I have already mentioned, that there is some usefulness of cameras in kind of predicting crime trends, but for sure there's usefulness in solving crime. And so we think that with a focus on America's 250th birthday, that an idea that we had for more penetration of cameras in commercial areas, especially in the CBD, is worthwhile. It's worth taking a look at.
So would it be asking the federal government to fund more cameras?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I envision.
Way to describe it. Okay. And I wanted to follow up on the sanctuary cities point. Mm-hmm. During Trump's first term, you spoke repeatedly about D.C., being proud to be a sanctuary city. Mm-hmm. So what definition were you operating off of then? And has that definition changed, or has something in the D.C. law changed to make us not a sanctuary city anymore?
Well, anytime I speak about it, I'm talking about our values. I'm not talking about any change I made to the law. Like, I made no changes to the law that says we're a sanctuary city. But no time during the Trump presidency or afterwards. And I believe that there is a piece of legislation that passed after the Trump administration that refers to values. So that's what I believe.
Is there a reason why you're not using the term anymore to describe the city?
Because I think it is misleading.
Can you explain more what you mean about misleading?
I think it's misleading to suggest to anyone that if you're violating immigration laws, that this is a place where you can violate immigration laws.
So basically that, federal immigration enforcement you are vulnerable to federal immigration enforcement.
You've always been vulnerable. Yeah. The city is not an immigration enforcement agency. No city is. The federal government is.
So what's your message to undocumented migrants in D.C. now?
We don't have a migrant crisis in our city. So I don't want anybody to think that we have been overrun and we have a migrant crisis, because we don't. We only had an influx of migrants who were bused here. And I might say they were kind of tricked, I think, into coming here. On buses from other places in the United States. So we don't have a migrant crisis in our city.
Ashraf Khalil, Associated Press.
Yeah.
You mentioned obviously not wanting to get into the weeds on an executive order that may or may not exist. Mm-hmm. So I'll just ask the question in a different way. Do you feel that D.C. home rule is under legitimate threat at this moment?
Well, you know that the Congress has threatened home rule in many ways, and it continues to do so. So if you say if it's legitimate, while it's a difficult path, like the Congress is, or I shouldn't say the Congress, I should say some people in the Congress are continuing to use that as a threat.
Right. Thank you. One more follow-up. follow-up question on the federal workers. In there, you had mentioned that in the coming weeks, you feel like the city's really going to have to step in to support. What does that look like to you, helping our federal workers?
I think it looks like sharing information, and it also looks at how we are strategic in sharing information about available jobs in the region, and I think that we're gonna do some work in that space. Yeah.
Maybe I have one quick question. One on the STEER Act and the Attorney General today announcing 3 lawsuits against Maryland drivers with tens of thousands of dollars in outstanding tickets. Just your thoughts on that and what message that might send to the thousands of Maryland and Virginia drivers who do have outstanding tickets.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what message it's going to send.
Okay. And on a second topic, Metropolitan Police Department is investigating Florida Congressman Corey Mills for a possible domestic assault case at his home here in the district. NBC4 is reporting that there has been a change to the 251, the public report on that. The first report came out with a very descriptive narrative of what appears to be an assault and injuries to the victim. That report has subsequently been scrubbed down to almost no information. And then a third version of that report was released that now says it's under investigation. And according to MPD, in addition to the investigation with the congressman, there's an internal affairs investigation into the handling of this case and exactly the narrative I just explained, that the police report was changed 3 times since the incident occurred. Just your thoughts on, one, that this happening with a member of Congress, but 2, that MPD somehow, somewhere in this chain of custody and investigation, dramatically changed the report that had the narrative of what was alleged to have happened.
Mark, I don't know anything about a report being changed, so I can't say anything about that. I can confirm that there is an internal investigation on making sure that all of our members did what they were supposed to do according to MPD policy. So I can confirm that. But I can't speak to anything about the police report.
And anything that you can confirm about the investigation into the member of Congress?
I cannot.
Thank you.
Last question.
Just one last follow-up on the juvenile crime I was asking.
Sure.
You said about how important it is to get them in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Is anybody, Attorney General, anyone else, not doing enough to do that right now? Or what will get more in the system?
Fewer kids being diverted or not charged with the crimes that they commit.
And is that a court problem? Is that an Attorney General problem?
It's both. Okay, thank you.
Hey, yes, I think so. Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't move on my fast.
I'm just going to
My name is Priscilla. Nice to meet you. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm all out of business. And this is my college Nora. She also runs your check.